Imagine being informed that donating $1,000 is the secret to gaining God's favor, blessings, and breakthroughs. It sounds motivating, doesn't it? However, what if thousands of people are incensed by that same message and wonder if it's manipulation or faith? Congregants, social media, and the gospel community itself are all divided as a result of Bishop Clarence McClendon's most recent speech. What actually occurs when your wallet is linked to a promise of divine favor? And why is this regarded by critics as one of the year's most contentious sermons? Stay with me, because what follows will surprise you and make you reevaluate all you believe to be true about ministry, faith, and finances. What if I told you that one sermon had the power to drive the gospel community into a frenzy and even cause loyal followers to doubt their faith? Recently, renowned ministerial figure Bishop Clarence McClendon delivered a sermon encouraging his followers to sow a $1,000 seed in order to receive God's favor, blessings, and breakthroughs. It may seem like a call to charity and faith at first, but the response has been anything but straightforward. We're going behind the scenes in this video to learn more about this contentious teaching. You'll hear responses from members of the congregation, first-hand accounts from ministry personnel, and professional viewpoints that haven't been generally shared. We'll explain why so many people believe it to be hazardous, unethical, and manipulative, and why money isn't the only factor here. You won't believe what transpired when the sermon's video clips went viral and sparked contentious discussions on social media and in gospel forums. Because the consequences of this message extend much beyond a single church session, this is where it becomes unbelievable. They bring up issues of faith, morality, and the propriety of associating material donations with spiritual benefits. You'll see why this $1,000 offering is more than just contentious at the end of this video. It all started with a Sunday service that would soon spark discussions well beyond the church gates. It's a story that calls into question the entire basis of prosperity preaching and compels believers to ponder, is this really of God? Bishop Clarence McClendon, a well-known speaker who combines inspirational sermons with helpful spiritual advice, took the pulpit with a message that caught people's attention right away. It was more than just a call to faith in the sermon. It was an outright call to donate. Not a small donation, but a $1,000 seed. This offering was presented by McClendon as a spiritual investment. You would receive God's favor, blessings, and breakthroughs if you spent $1,000. Many congregation members found it to be uplifting, even transformative. Some participants felt that this seed could practically change their lives, so the promise of heavenly favor coupled with a material act of giving caused a rush of exhilaration. Individuals agreed, made notes, and even started making plans on how to reach the recommended quantity. However, disagreement was developing. The message seemed deceptive to critics. They contended that transforming faith into a business muddled the distinction between forced prosperity preaching and true spiritual counsel. The $1,000 figure's specificity was what made this really explosive. It was neither a symbolic gesture nor a suggestion. Many people perceived the specific, material requirement as coercing members to associate financial contributions with spiritual advantages. Soon after, social media users began analyzing sermon clips. The responses were divisive. Advocates referred to it as a daring, faith-based approach, stating that it inspired individuals to act with both conviction and financial dedication. But critics perceived something much darker, a strategy that quietly associates one's wallet size with compliance, favor, and personal value. Even within the church, there were murmurs. While some attendees departed feeling anxious and wondering if the urge to donate was morally dubious or genuinely spiritual, others felt inspired and encouraged. Theologians caution that this type of discourse can have long-term effects, especially if it encourages believers to explicitly link their material resources to divine favor. However, what followed took the dispute to a completely new level. Reactions outside of the crowd erupted after sermon video clips were posted online. YouTube, Twitter, and gospel forums were inundated with comments, arguments, and criticisms. This was no longer merely a church conversation. The topic of faith, money, and morality in contemporary ministry became a national controversy. As the narrative progressed, insiders disclosed information that many viewers could not have predicted regarding the preparation and purpose of the sermon. There were layers of strategy, purpose, and, some claim, manipulation behind what appeared to be a straightforward message about giving. Now the question was more important than before. Was this a well-planned appeal that conflated faith with money, or was it a true spiritual lesson? The responses were swift and forceful after the $1,000 seed sermon was over. The reaction within the church was mixed. Bishop Clarence McClendon seemed to be providing a concrete means of expressing confidence and trust in God, which motivated certain members of the congregation. These people saw the $1,000 offering as a chance to act decisively because they thought that making such a financial commitment could bring about previously unheard of blessings in their lives. Pews, coffee tables, and meetings in small groups were humming with conversation. How did they locate the funds? Was this really what God had commanded? Would this truly change their lives? However, there was more than one side. Many people were uncomfortable when they exited the service. The $1,000 figure's specificity felt more like pressure to them than inspiration. Their heads whirled with questions. Does the size of my pocketbook actually affect God's favor? Is someone forcing me to donate? Friends and relatives discussed these doubts in private, but they weren't silent for very long. As soon as the sermon's video snippets appeared on social media, the discussion erupted on sites like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Online comment sections became battlefields, disputes erupted, and hashtags started trending. McClendon was commended by supporters who said the message was audacious and based on faith. This $1,000 seed is precisely what God wants us to do to activate benefits, according to posts that say, finally, someone is teaching that giving is not just spiritual, it's action. Critics, meantime, were just as outspoken. The sermon was deemed manipulative and even unethical by some. They contended that associating spiritual favor with a specific monetary sum runs the risk of making people who are unable to contribute feel inadequate spiritually. Others characterized it as coercive, pointing out that weaker believers could feel under pressure to donate more than they can afford because they think their blessings and faith depend on it. The sermon was described in posts as demonic, contentious, and a perilous kind of prosperity preaching. Comments weren't the end of the commotion. Prominent theologians, ministry bloggers, and gospel leaders started offering their opinions in public. While some highlighted the ethical duty of pastors when talking about contributing, others questioned the biblical foundation for such a detailed financial teaching. One theologian wrote, "Faith is not a financial transaction. Linking obedience with a monetary figure risks turning spiritual devotion into commerce." The sermon was viewed as a practical application of faith by believers, while critics saw it as a troubling reflection of modern prosperity preaching, where spiritual guidance can sometimes uncomfortably intertwine with financial incentive. As tensions grew within the church, emails and messages from worried churchgoers flooded in, many of whom expressed discomfort with the framing of the $1,000 seed or asked for clarification. Staff members and ministry leaders reportedly debated whether the message might alienate some congregants or be misunderstood by the wider audience. Then came the viral moment, when a brief video of Bishop McClendon fervently exhorting his followers to sow the $1,000 seed was viewed by hundreds of thousands of people. The video's comment section turned into a battlefield for both supporters and detractors, with some sharing testimonies of financial breakthroughs and others cautioning viewers against sermons that make a connection between faith and money. What makes this story even more interesting and contentious, however, is what insiders later disclosed. According to people familiar with the ministry, the sermon wasn't an impromptu appeal to donate. Rather, it might have been a part of a bigger plan to inspire generosity through focused, powerful messaging that combined influence, psychology, and faith. As the public debate raged online, the real story was taking place behind the scenes of Bishop Clarence McClendon's ministry. The question now loomed even larger. If this sermon is part of a calculated approach to encourage donations, what does that say about the line between spiritual guidance and financial influence? And more importantly, how far will this ripple effect spread as the conversation continues to grow across the gospel community and social media? The $1,000 seed sermon was by no means a haphazard call to action, according to insiders who spoke on condition of anonymity, who say the message was carefully prepared, delivered with accuracy, and deliberately crafted to elicit a particular response from the congregation. Longtime employees reportedly had conflicting opinions about it. A staff member allegedly said, "It felt less like inspiration and more like pressure." While some saw the lecture as a daring, creative way to spur action and faith-based financial commitment, others were uneasy about the moral and spiritual ramifications. Teaching generosity and having people feel that they must contribute in order to obtain blessings are two very different things. Even the smallest details, like the order of the message, the tone of delivery, and the personal testimony shared, were planned to emotionally and spiritually connect with the audience. Insiders claim that this sermon's planning involved careful attention to language, timing, and emphasis. Phrases like "sow your $1,000 seed," which were repeated not just as a suggestion but as a directive that framed giving as an essential step toward unlocking favor from God, were used. According to reports, internal discussions centered on the possible backlash, with staff members debating whether focusing on a specific dollar amount could lead to misunderstandings, alienate some congregants, or even be viewed as manipulative. They were concerned that associating divine favor with a specific financial offering could unintentionally cause those who were unable to give the recommended amount to feel guilty, inadequate, or spiritually failed. Interestingly, insiders also disclosed that the sermon may be a part of a larger series of teachings that highlight financial sowing as a route to blessing. According to sources, over the past few months, a number of teachings have quietly reaffirmed the notion that giving and obedience are closely linked to both material and spiritual advancements. Critics argue that this long-term strategy raises serious ethical concerns about manipulating the faith and trust of congregants. But the debate wasn't limited to ministry members. Some were also worried about the public's perception, with social media magnifying every word, every clip, and every reaction. Staff members were also concerned about the widening gap between supporters and critics. Congregational emails started to pour in, with some praising the sermon for its audacity and inspiration, and others expressing confusion, frustration, and even anger. One insider described reading these emails as an emotional roller coaster, attempting to strike a balance between accountability and support. The question of motive also surfaced in these behind-the-scenes conversations. While proponents contend that this is a valid and faith-based call to action, detractors see a more calculated dynamic at work, one where emotional appeal and spiritual authority intersect with financial influence. Was the $1,000 seed teaching solely about empowering believers, or was it also a calculated approach to drive generosity and engagement? The tension becomes even more compelling at this point. According to some anonymous former staff members, similar sermons in the past had raised quiet internal concerns, but none of them went viral like this one. This points to a pattern in which high-impact, targeted messages are used to encourage giving and support a prosperity-based theology, sometimes at the expense of ethical clarity. As the story progressed, these insider revelations started to surface online through blogs, forums, and commentary. And the discussion moved from the sermon itself to the ethics of prosperity preaching, the integrity of modern ministry, and the responsibilities of faith leaders. And for viewers, the crucial question is, how can believers distinguish between subtle manipulation and true spiritual guidance if faith and finances are being so purposefully entwined? However, the story doesn't end with internal arguments and ethical issues. Social media's amplification of the public reaction is only the start. What happens when regular viewers, theologians, and critics come together online to analyze the intentions, strategies, and consequences of this contentious sermon? After videos of Bishop Clarence McClendon's $1,000 seed sermon went viral, the controversy grew faster than anyone could have predicted. Supporters, detractors, and impartial observers all voiced their opinions on social media, sometimes vehemently and at other times angrily. Hashtags such as Bishop McClendon, the Prosperity Gospel Debate, and the number one seed controversy started to trend, and the discussion swiftly spread from forums dedicated to the gospel to mainstream media. And faith without action is dead. McClendon's supporters flooded comment sections with testimonials and words of encouragement, with many sharing personal stories of how sowing financial seeds had already led to breakthroughs in their lives. Posts included phrases like, "I sowed a seed, and doors opened I never imagined." The sermon was more than just a call to give. It was a blueprint for taking faith seriously and expecting concrete results from God's promises. For these believers, the $1,000 seed is a step of obedience. However, the critics were equally vocal, and their voices often carried even more intensity. Many referred to the sermon as manipulative, arguing that it equated spiritual favor with financial capacity and could injure vulnerable congregants. The polarizing reactions were not limited to ordinary viewers. Theologians, ministry leaders, and gospel commentators jumped into the conversation, analyzing the biblical and moral implications of the sermon. Commenters wrote about feeling pressured, guilted, or judged for their inability to give such a sum. Discussion swiftly expanded into broader debates about the ethics of prosperity preaching, with some labeling the message exploitative or ethically questionable. "Faith should not have a price tag," wrote one well-known commenter. Another contended, "We run the risk of turning devotion into a transaction when giving is directly linked to blessings. This is a calculated tactic that uses hope and faith in God to encourage large donations, an ethical gray area that deserves scrutiny." Reactions were mixed even within the gospel music and ministry community. McClendon's supporters, who valued his leadership and spiritual guidance, felt defensive, while those who had long questioned his prosperity teachings viewed this as more evidence that certain ministries are dangerously conflating faith and money. Additionally, because the videos went viral, the social media storm also revealed an unexpected consequence. Discussions about the sermon sparked broader discussions about personal faith, accountability, and discernment. Believers started asking themselves, "How do I know if a message is truly from God or if it's designed to influence my actions for the benefit of the ministry?" The story was picked up by stream media, which framed it as a national debate about money, faith, and ethical preaching. How can one donate consistently without anticipating a transactional relationship? Result: the public response also revealed the demographic gap in attitudes. Older members of the congregation who had grown up with traditional gospel teachings were frequently more dubious of the precise $1,000 number. Most significantly, where is the boundary between spiritual encouragement and ethical manipulation? The sermon became not just a local or church issue, but a cultural phenomenon, raising questions about the changing nature of modern ministry and the impact of digital amplification. Younger followers, more sensitive to social media trends and prosperity messages, were split between inspiration and concern, frequently engaging in heated online debates.